Chess is a two-player, turn-based fantasy war simulator which forgoes a lot of the modern genre conventions, such as resource management, and instead distills the experience down into its most basic elements. Some more hardcore fans of the genre might find the game to be a bit feature-lacking, but this hasn't stopped it from becoming somewhat of a household name in the strategy game sphere. In fact, some people take this game far too seriously, like the time when the two largest superpowers in the world let a chess game decide whether everyone else was going to eat burgers or bread for the rest of their lives. Thankfully, Burgerland won and they got to be the protagonist in the musical adaptation. Chess, which stands for Combat and Heresy Expert Strategy Simulator, follows the story of the battle between the black and white nations who have lived in harmony for many years, until one day the white nation launches an unprovoked attack, leading to further escalation and eventually all-out war. Players take on the role of one of these two military titans and must command their armies in order to corner and capture their opponent's king. A simple concept in theory, but even with such basic mechanics, the game manages to offer a decent amount of depth, although don't expect anything as complex as the Civilization series or Valkyrie Chronicles. Having said that, as a quick to pick up and tough to master game, it does a good job to scratch the strategy itch until we get the next non-mobile Command & Conquer game. So, without further ado, dear viewer, join me, disembodied orange internet man, on the next leg of the Steam pilgrimage as we discuss the indie and slightly niche strategy game, Chess. Oh, and spoilers ahead. There was actually quite a bit of controversy when Chess was first released in the West, with claims that the game was actually plagiarized from another game called Chaturanga by a relatively and literally unknown Indian developer. Accusations of whitewashing and cultural appropriation were thrown around, and while the influences can still be seen, the fanbase at large has ultimately come to accept Chess as its own unique entity. Chess takes place from the perspective of two nations who start on the brink of war. Each player takes control of one of these factions, with the white side always being the aggressors. This does strip some of the player agency and limits role-playing options, but once the game begins, each player can move their units, or as it's called in this game, pieces, into any square that that piece can reach. The two factions also act as somewhat of a difficulty setting. Playing as white is definitely easier as you get to go first and have a massive advantage, but playing as black requires you to constantly be reacting to your opponent's attacks. Each player takes turns moving one of their units in a set pattern. Moving one of your pieces onto an opponent's piece will cause you to capture that unit, removing it from the game. Apparently, the decision to refer to this as capturing rather than killing was made to ensure that the game received a teen rating for wider appeal, but I think that it may have benefited from a more realistic and gritty art style. Each player has access to a total of 16 pieces, with 6 different unit types available. The pawns are your frontline soldiers, making up the entire front row of your army. These pretty pathetic pieces are only able to move forward by 1 space, but if a pawn hasn't moved yet this game, it gains a special dash function. These guys never really get any character development, however, and they're sort of just left as nameless, homogenous frontline soldiers. I would have liked to see a little bit more personality coming from them. There is an Easter egg where getting one behind enemy lines causes them to find the inner strength within and they level up into a different unit, but this is so hard to find I wouldn't be surprised if most players never actually figure it out. The Knight is a melee-focused reverse centaur unit with the head of a horse and the pedestal of a human. The Knight can only move in an L shape because if you're relying on them for any strategy, you've already lost. They also have a special jump move that they can use to move over other pieces on the board, but good luck trying to get any enemy piece in exactly the right square to make use of them. The lore implications of these terrifying anthropomorphic creatures are vast, however, clearly the result of some madman's experiments. The bishop is a strange piece. I jumped into my first game expecting some kind of a cleric. Instead, I found myself with another melee fighter, only able to move diagonally, although at least he can move as many spaces as he wants. Throughout my playthrough of the game, I found myself using him more than the other two pieces so far, but I was disappointed at the lack of a magical option as the game is sorely in need of a healer unit. And it's not like there's no magic in the game at all. The Rook, for example, is a giant enchanted fortress capable of cutting lines across the entire battlefield. You would think that this would make them a bit tankier than the other units, but these guys can still be felled by even a simple pawn, which does break the immersion for me at least, and it shows that maybe more thought could have went into making each unit feel a bit more unique. Finally, we have the King and Queen, and unfortunately another example of the woke feminist agenda pervading our gaming space, as they've clearly had to dumb down the male protagonist in order for her to stand out more. The Queen is capable of moving as many spaces as she wishes in any direction, which is fine, if totally unrealistic, but the King finds himself severely neutered in terms of power for no other reason than the script simply demands it. This story is clearly a deconstruction of the classic damsel in distress trope, as the stupid bumbling king must be protected by his overpowered female counterpart. The game ends once the king has been captured. Sort of. Every game ends on a cliffhanger where the king would be captured the following turn, but it's never allowed to play out and the outcome is left up to your imagination. This was originally meant to open the game up for a revenge sequel, but the devs haven't been active in quite a while, so that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. My main problem with the game is that it gets a bit samey after a while. Both factions control almost identically, and there are very limited options for customization. You can't choose your starting formation, there's no unlockable armies or the ability to upgrade units as you progress, and basic things like ranged units or healers and support are just absent. This similarity between matches means that optimal strategies are dominant and it's very difficult to break away from the current meta. I've played this game for probably 10 hours now. It really shouldn't be possible for someone to beat me in just 2 turns simply because I'm not playing the way that the devs intended me to. If you can get past this though, the game has its moments, just don't expect the craze to last too long. In a year or two, it might be hard to find a game online. As for how you should experience chess, there are a couple of options. I started out with a free browser-based demo that I found online before eventually moving on to the Ultra version on Steam. But I was disappointed to find that apart from the visual style, not much else had changed, with still very limited options gameplay-wise. The game was also translated into a physical tabletop edition, although I don't know how much I can recommend this, as unlike the virtual edition, there's nothing to stop you from just moving any piece anywhere that you want, which completely breaks the balance of the game. Thankfully, all chess sets come with these single sip adult beverage cups so that you and your opponent can pretend like you're actually having fun while playing this fucking game. 10 out of 10.